in congratulating England on last night, commending Wales for inspiring millions, and also wishing everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tommy Shepherd.
In 2014, his predecessor David Cameron signed up to the Smith Commission, which promised, amongst other things, that nothing in its report would prevent Scotland becoming an independent country should the people of Scotland so choose. Can I ask the Prime Minister, does he share that view? And if he does, and in light of last week's Supreme Court judgment, will he bring forward legislation to allow that choice to be exercised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we did have that conversation not so many years ago. It was described as a once-in-a-generation referendum. But and we discussed this last week. I think what the people of Scotland want is for us to be working constructively together to focus on their priorities. That's indeed what we're doing in his own area, investing hundreds of millions of pounds in a growth deal and ensuring that with a new concert hall we can enshrine Edinburgh's reputation as a city of culture.
Sir Paul Beresford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just returned from the South Pacific and I found there a deep... I've resisted the All Black jokes, Mr. Speaker, but I found there a deep concern at the expanding tentacles of Communist China. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that China is more than just, as he put it, a systemic challenge, but in fact an expanding, serious geopolitical threat?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, China is indeed a country with fundamentally different values to ours and an authoritarian leadership intent on reshaping the international order, but actions speak louder than words, and that's why we passed the new National Security and Investment Act. Just recently we used that act to block the sale of Newport Wafer Fab, and this week with our announcement of Sizewell C, we ensured that China's state-owned Nuclear Energy Corporation will no longer be a part of the project. This government making sure that we protect our country's security.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I join the Prime Minister in saying, well done, England, and I hope we can say that next week and the week after. Commiserations to Wales, so I'm sure we'll be back in the World Cup tournament before too long. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we mark that tomorrow is World AIDS Day. Mr. Speaker, Winchester College has a rowing club, a rifle club, an extensive art collection. They charge over £45,000 a year in fees. Why did he hand them nearly £6 million of taxpayers' money this year in what his Levelling Up Secretary calls egregious state support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased he wants to talk about schools, because we recently announced billions more funding for our schools. We're helping millions of the most disadvantaged children catch up with their lost learning. And we're driving up school standards, Mr. Speaker. But during COVID, he wanted to keep schools closed. We shouldn't be surprised because I listen to parents and he listens to his union paymasters.
Mr. Speaker, his Levelling Up Secretary, I see him down there, who after all was Education Secretary for 4 years, said you could scarcely find a better way of ending burning injustices than scrapping these handouts. And here's why, and he talks about driving up standards. Just down the road in Southampton, and he'll know this, 4 in every 10 pupils failed their English or Maths GCSE this year. 4 in 10. Is that £6 million of taxpayers' money better spent on rifle ranges in Winchester or driving up standards in Southampton?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about school standards. It's under a Conservative government, and thanks to the reforms of the former Education Secretary, that now almost 90% of schools are good or outstanding. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, whenever he attacks me about where I went to school, he is attacking the hard-working aspiration of millions of people in this country. He's attacking people like my parents, Mr. Speaker. This is a country that believes in opportunity, not resentment. He doesn't understand that, and that's why he's not fit to lead.
Mr. Speaker, if he thinks the route to better education in this country is tax breaks for private schools in the hope they might hand that sum down to state school, that's laughable. Trickle-down education is nonsense. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just the Levelling Up Secretary. His Education Minister sitting there asks, how much better would it be if Conservatives got rid of these handouts? He talks about his record. It's simple. He can carry on being pushed around by the lobbyists, giving away £1.7 billion to private schools every year, or we can put that money to good use. In the Tory scandal, he talks about his record. Hundreds of thousands of children leaving school without the qualifications that they need. I've made my choice. What's his?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're improving school standards for every pupil in this country. It's our reforms that are leading to us marching up the PISA league tables for reading, for writing, more good and outstanding schools, more investment in every single school. But he talks about choice. This is about supporting aspiration, Mr. Speaker, and that's what this government is proud to do.
Mr. Speaker, he really does need to get out more. And he talks about aspiration. Mr. Speaker, they are killing off aspiration in this country, and it's not just education. Why is the dream of home ownership far more remote now than it was when his party came into power 12 years ago?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what have we done in those 12 years? The highest number of new homes started in 15 years. Largest number of first-time buyers in 20 years. He talked about 10 years ago. What do we inherit? The lowest level of house building in a century.
Mr. Speaker, would you believe it? Mr. Speaker, the simple fact is this. Every year, the age at which people can buy their first home goes up. At this rate, under this government, a child born in the UK today wouldn't be able to buy their first home until they're 45. Now, I love my kids, but I don't want to be cooking them dinner in 30 years' time. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've heard he's having a relaunch. Apparently, it's called Operation Get Tough. So how tough is he going to get with his backbenchers who are blocking the new homes this country so badly needs?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering record numbers of new homes under this government. That's what we're doing. He talks about toughness, Mr. Speaker. He's too weak to stop dozens of his own MPs joining the picket lines. So what, if he wants to support those hard-working families and show some leadership, why doesn't he confirm right now that no Labour MPs are going to join those picket lines?
Mr. Speaker, whichever way you slice it, it's always the same. Whether it's private schools, oil giants, or those who don't pay their taxes here, every week he hands out cash to those that don't need it. Every week he gets pushed around, and every week he gets weaker. But I can help him with this one. He doesn't need to do another grubby deal. If he wants to defeat that amendment from his anti-growth backbenchers on national targets for housing, Labour will lend him the votes to do so. Country before party, that's the Labour way. Why doesn't he try it?
Mr. Speaker, I think I think we did hear too weak to confirm, no one on the picket line. But Mr. Speaker, it's the same old Labour ideas: more debt, more inflation, more strikes, and more migration. He tells his party what they want to hear. I'll take the difficult decisions for this country, and that's the choice, Mr. Speaker. It's the politics of yesterday with him, or the future of the country with me.
As hosts of this week's International PSVI conference, the UK again highlighted the need for more action to prevent sexual violence in conflict. With heart-rending accounts of women in Ukraine being brutalised in this way, and reports that a third of women in conflict zones can be victims, will the Prime Minister champion with me as his Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief the work being undertaken with young people across the world to prevent religion or belief being weaponised, which can later manifest into sexual violence in conflict?
Prime Minister.
I'm incredibly grateful to my honourable friend for her dedicated work in this area. And she's absolutely right to highlight that this week the UK hosted the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict Initiative Conference. It was an incredible success. I pay tribute to all those involved, and as she said, we managed to reach a new political declaration in the conference where over 50 different countries have agreed to put an end to sexual violence in conflict, and she deserves praise for all her work in this area.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in sending prayers and condolences to the wife of Doddy Weir, who sadly passed away at the weekend. The absolute giant of a man, an inspirational figure in Scottish rugby, and someone who raised £8 million for M&D charities over the course of the last 6 years. Our thoughts and prayers are with Cathy, with Hamish, with Angus and with Ben. Mr. Speaker, let me wish everyone a happy St Andrew's Day. And those that know anything about St Andrew know that he's not just the patron of Scotland, he's celebrated right across Europe. That is why it is such a sad sight to watch this Prime Minister rammed through a bill that would rip up 4,000 pieces of European law. Laws that protect workers' rights, food standards and environmental protections. And it's an even worse sight watching the leader of the Labour Party desperately trying to out-Brexit the Prime Minister, ruling out freedom of movement and any hope of a Swiss-style deal. Brexit is now the elephant in the room that neither the Tories or Labour are willing to confront. When will the Prime Minister finally see reality and admit that Brexit is a significant long-term cause of the UK economic crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by joining my honourable friend in offering our condolences to the family and friends of Doddy Weir, and I'd also like to pay tribute to him for his campaign to raise awareness of MND, which has made a big difference. Now, Mr. Speaker, straightforwardly, I was proud to support Brexit. It was the right thing for this country. It allows us to first of all get control of our borders, which is incredibly important, and reduce migration, all of which, Mr. Speaker, I noticed what he said, and I agree with him actually about the slight dexterity of the Leader of the Opposition on these topics of free movement. And I know he'll join me in reminding the Leader of Opposition about his previous promise to defend free movement of people, not something that we support, Mr. Speaker, but we're also seizing the economic opportunities, deregulating and signing trade deals around the world. That's how we'll drive growth and prosperity.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his remarks on Doddy Weir, but once again what we're seeing over Brexit is better together. We're used to that in Scotland. The problem for both the Prime Minister and the Labour leader is that when it comes to Brexit, even their own voters don't agree with them. The last YouGov poll showed a record 56% now believe it was wrong to leave the European Union, and that figure is 71% in Scotland. 1 in 5 who actually voted for Brexit have now changed their minds. More and more people across these islands are wise to the fact that "Make Brexit Work" is just another stupid slogan. But Scotland can't be stuck with a new Brexit Together coalition of the Tories and Labour. So on this St Andrew's Day, can the Prime Minister finally tell people in Scotland the democratic path to escape Westminster control, to deliver independence, so we can get back to the European Union?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about democracy and votes. I think the difference between him and I is that I respect the result of referendums. He talks about this. Just remember one thing, Mr. Speaker. We had the fastest vaccine rollout in the world. We had that because of our freedoms after leaving the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, manufacturing remains a key part of the UK economy, and for the West Midlands, that means automotive. That's important in my constituency of Rugby, which includes firms in the supply chain and workers at Jaguar Land Rover. With the move to all new cars sold in the UK to become electric by 2030, means that which is critical for us to have a site for battery manufacture. Assembly is already taking place elsewhere in the world where batteries are made. So will the Prime Minister give his support to the bid for a gigafactory in Coventry?
Prime Minister.
I pay tribute to my honourable friend's efforts to progress this project. We're fully committed, Mr. Speaker, to securing investment to grow our electric vehicle supply chain. Now, although he'll know I can't comment on individual commercial negotiations, we did announce in the Net Zero Strategy £350 million of funding in the Automotive Transformation Fund to support the development of that supply chain, and I wish him every success in his bid.
Colin Eastwood.
Yesterday, BBC Northern Ireland announced cuts to programming and jobs at BBC Radio Foyle that, in my view, will leave the station totally unsustainable. The BBC Charter places an obligation on that organisation to allow audiences to fully engage on local issues. This decision, in my view, is a very clear breach of that obligation, leaving licence fee payers outside the Greater Belfast area without proper local programming. Will the Prime Minister act to defend this very important local public broadcasting service?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe very strongly in local public broadcasting, and indeed the government has taken steps to support local media. I'll be very happy to look at the specific issue he raises and bring it up with the BBC when I next see them.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Guildford tell me they want women and girls to feel safe, and I'm delighted to have had some successes in getting lights turned back on, including on York East Bridge on behalf of concerned students at the University of Surrey. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that even in difficult times we cannot take a single step back from the brilliant work this Conservative government is doing to tackle violence against women and girls?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like my honourable friend, the government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls and making our streets safer. We've created the Safer Streets Fund, which funds additional patrols, extra lighting and more CCTV. And indeed, the Street Safe online tool allows users, including those in her constituency, to pinpoint locations where they feel unsafe so that the local police can take appropriate action. And I'll continue to support her in her efforts.
Abhinav Bongasari. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The two boys, 16-year-old boys, Charlie Bartolo and Kiani Sianko, were tragically killed in my constituency of Erith and Thamesmead this weekend. My heart goes out to the families and friends left behind. We really need to come across the House to address and tackle serious youth violence. So can I ask the Prime Minister what he is doing to address knife crime epidemic?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for her question and join her in expressing my condolences to the family and friends of the two boys. I also read about it. It's an awful tragedy. She rightly asked what we are doing to make our streets safer and stamp out the scourge of night crime. We're boosting the number of police officers, as she'll know, 15,000 on our way to 20,000, and we're also giving them the powers they need to get knives off our streets, including lifting restrictions on stop and search and introducing new court orders to target known knife offenders. I agree with her, this is something we need to do more on, and she should know that the government will be fully committed to tackling it.
Gordon Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When will my right honourable friend's government bring forward any emergency legislation that's needed to deport those migrants who came across the channel illegally in small boats and are now being put up in hotels paid for by hard-pressed British taxpayers?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are determined to do whatever it takes to break the business model of people smugglers who are causing the needless loss of life of people across the Channel and putting unsustainable pressure on our asylum system. Our Nationality and Borders Act opposed by the party opposite, Mr. Speaker, gives us new powers which we fully intend to use, and we will take further measures as required to properly control our borders and reduce the number of illegal crossings.
Andy McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was sad to see in a video from his Oxford days the future Prime Minister saying he hadn't a single friend who was working class. And he's not likely to make any soon, because while he sits on a personal fortune, he's refusing the reasonable demands of nurses, railway workers and many others forced to take industrial action just to make ends meet. Why doesn't he give them the wage increases they need and fund it by making the rich pay the same rate on unearned income as workers have to pay for their hard graft? And whilst he's at it, why not scrap the non-dumb tax loophole that he's all too familiar with, which is costing the public £3.2 billion?
Mr. Speaker, I have nothing but admiration and gratitude to our nurses for all the work they do. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is simply unreasonable and unaffordable to have a 19% pay rise. Now, if that's what the honourable gentleman thinks is, I'm sure the Labour Party can explain to us how they would pay for that and the impact it would have on inflation. But I tell you this, Mr. Speaker, if he really wants to support working people, maybe he should get off the picket line and end the strikes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The train service between Wilmslow in my constituency and London was always hourly, direct, and took 1 hour 50. Now, you'd be very lucky if you got a direct train, and the journey time is double, or often double. And that's not restricted to strike days, that's day in, day out on Avanti trains. So can the Prime Minister tell my constituents what the government's going to do to sort this out and get the West Coast service back to what it used to be, because the service at the moment is completely unacceptable?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the unacceptable deterioration in the quality of Avanti's service. The Transport Secretary is rightly monitoring and holding them to account. There is a plan to increase the number of trains to 100 additional drivers, Mr. Speaker, and restoring the full direct service between Manchester and London. But what this plan needs, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the party opposite support it, is trade union cooperation.
Lyra Wilson. Rubbish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure members opposite felt a certain sense of deja vu watching the Welsh defence during last night's match. After all, they know what it feels like to have Marcus Rashford run rings round them. Mr. Speaker, off the pitch, Marcus Rashford has been a tireless campaigner on child hunger. So, in the face of fierce Conservative opposition. So, will the Prime Minister, given that he delivered on the pitch last night, will the Prime Minister give him the best thanks possible by delivering free school meals for every child living in poverty?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're supporting almost 2 million children with free school meals. We also, last year, invested hundreds of millions of pounds in the new holiday activity and food programme, which is broadening that support through the holidays for those kids who need it, on top of our work to roll out breakfast clubs across the country.
Blake Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The pandemic has played havoc with school attendance, and the Children's Commissioner says that almost 115,000 children are now being home educated, a 34% higher than before the pandemic, with little, if any, monitoring of their educational welfare. Even worse, 9 in 10 local authorities believe they have not been able to identify home-educated children. So when will my right honourable friend be bringing forward the register of homeschooled children so they're identified and we can be sure that their needs are looked after and they're not falling through the net?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we support the right of parents to home educate their children, and we know many do well, but however this is not the case for all, and that's why local authorities must seek to identify those children missing education We've published guidance on the arrangements they should be following, and indeed make sure that they have oversight of elective home education.
From West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After record payouts last year to shareholders, the Royal Mail recently this year announced huge half-year losses and plans to cut 10,000 jobs, while threatening the cherished universal service obligation, which guarantees a minimum 6-day-a-week letter delivery service in the tradition of the black penny from 1840. Why has his government not yet committed to investigate the mismanagement and cack-handed mismanagement of this iconic British service and protecting its future and loyal postal workers?
Mr. Speaker, again, I have nothing but gratitude and appreciation for the hard work of our postal workers. But when it is not the right approach. It is not the right approach to go on strike, especially demanding pay, as we have heard, that is simply unaffordable for hard-working British taxpayers. The Honourable Lady would do well to see that, because in the context that we're in, it is simply not possible to give people the type of pay demands that they are making.
Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Due to the unique geography of Briggangool and the Isle of Axholme, we are one of the most flood-prone areas of the country. So whilst I welcome the record £5.4 billion of flood defence funding, can I ask the Prime Minister, ahead of next year's budget, to look at easing the rules around how that money is spent, so more of it can be spent on maintenance, which is so important to keeping my constituents dry?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to look at that for my honourable friend. He's right to highlight the doubling of the investment that this government has put in flood defences, but it's right that we get the mix right between that, and I'll take that away with him.
Lynn Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The West Midlands Chief Constable has revealed that a vulnerable child was forced to spend 2 days living in a police station during a mental health crisis because the right specialist help could not be found for him. I know more and more young people are unable to access appropriate support for mental health. Will he accept Labour's plans to scrap private school charitable status and use the money to fund a mental health professional in every school?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady, we've already committed to offer all state schools a grant to train a senior mental health lead by the end of this Parliament. Already 6 out of 10 have doing so. There's funding for all of them to have it. In addition to that, we're increasing the support that we give to those with eating disorders, because she's right, mental health does affect young people. This government is backing those people to get the support that they need.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of people crossing the Channel is a national emergency. The number of migrants in hotels is a national emergency. Isn't it time we had a Cobra-style committee involving the DWP, DLUC, the Home Office, and led by Number 10 to tackle this crisis?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share my honourable friend's frustration, and I want to reassure him that we will do whatever it takes to reduce the number of illegal crossings to this country, take any new powers that we need to. I look forward to working with him to ensure we can do that, because this is fundamentally about our sovereignty, Mr. Speaker, and the proper control of our borders. Whilst the Labour Party have tried to oppose every measure we have taken, we will keep going, because we need to make sure that we stop the crossings.
Justin Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the UK Government's Regulatory Policy Committee stated that the retained EU law bill is not fit for purpose. The Institute for Directors, the TUC and countless others have urged the Government to scrap the bill. And businesses across Scotland have already suffered severe economic damage under this Tory Brexit agenda, and they now see the outlook clouded with even more complexity and uncertainty. If the Prime Minister is serious about protecting the economy and looking after SMEs, why not do the right thing and scrap this disastrous ideological bill now?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually taking advantage of our freedoms is going to drive growth and jobs and prosperity in the United Kingdom. Whether it's in life sciences, whether it's reducing the burdens on data for those SMEs, whether it's in the financial services industry in Scotland, that's how we're going to create prosperity across this nation, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're going to get on and deregulate post-Brexit.
I'm going to come again, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and the Chancellor have rightly pointed out that levelling up is for the whole of the United Kingdom. And as a Southampton man, my right honourable friend will know that since the 1970s, Eastleigh has been promised a much-needed Chickenhall Lane bypass. So will he agree to meet me and Hampshire County Council to finally get this project moving?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's right that we spread opportunity across the country, including in Eastleigh and the South. I understand that it's for Hampshire County Council to bring forward the proposal for the bypass, which I hope they do at the next funding opportunity, and I'll ensure that my honourable friend and the Council have a meeting with the Transport Minister as soon as possible.
Final question on Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tory ideology has blocked onshore wind development in Scotland for years. Peterhead carbon capture clusters lost out in funding twice and still only classed as a reserve. Pump storage hydro schemes have been blocked because the UK government won't discuss a pricing mechanism. If the Prime Minister actually does care about net zero and cares about Scottish jobs, will at least take action to advance Peterhead CCS and pump storage hydro in Scotland?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, not only are we supporting in this country carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, offshore wind, all new technologies that will help us get to net zero, all of which will create jobs in Scotland, we're also supporting our transition, Mr. Speaker, and that's good for the Scottish economy and it's good for Scottish jobs and something the SNP would do well to support.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Let us start with the urgent question. Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will provide an update.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. The government welcomes the opportunity to stress again the importance of the role of the independent advisor and this government's commitment to it. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the appointment of a new independent advisor is a priority and that the appointment process is underway. Honourable members will understand that appointment of this nature is significant and has to be done well. Much as honourable members might wish me to, it would not be appropriate for me to comment further on specifics of what is an ongoing appointments process. Let me assure honourable members the adjudication of issues of ministerial conduct does not stop because the independent advisor is not yet in post. Conduct matters and conduct issues will be dealt with quickly and appropriately, irrespective of that appointment process. This is what honourable members will have seen with regards to the complaints made against the Deputy Prime Minister. On receipt of formal complaints by the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister requested an independent investigation to be conducted by an individual from outside government, and Adam Tolley QC has been appointed to conduct the investigation, and the terms of reference have now been published. The process is underway and Mr Tolley will provide his report to the MP in due course. It is right that these matters are investigated fully, but it would not be right to comment further on them with that process ongoing. I'd also like to reassure honourable members that the process of managing the interests of ministers continues in the absence of an independent advisor. The Permanent Secretary, as the policy expert on each department's remit, leads the process in their department in the absence of an independent advisor. And the Cabinet Office is able to provide advice in line with precedent. All relevant interests are declared by ministers upon taking office and are kept up to date at all times. The publication of the list of ministers' interests is the end point of the ministerial interest process and takes place at regular intervals to make the public aware of the relevant interests of ministers. I'll end by reiterating that as soon as there is an update on the process to appoint an independent advisor on ministers' interests, the government
will update the House.
Angela Redder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. And how many times have I heard soon, jam tomorrow, mañana. We need the Prime Minister, who promised to appoint an independent ethics advisor as one of his first acts, to actually deal with this issue. Yet despite ministers accused of bullying and intimidation or reappointed despite security breaches, still no advisor. And it's clear that ethics and integrity isn't a priority for them, despite the Prime Minister's words. And we're told that recruitment is underway, but apparently no one will accept this poison chalice. So can he tell us today how many candidates have been approached and how many have refused the job? Will the Prime Minister follow his disgraced predecessors by denying the so-called independent advisor the power to launch their own investigations? Or does the Prime Minister have no plan to restore standards and will just preserve the rotten regime that he inherited? And what on earth is the system in the meantime? Who will investigate the allegations of Islamophobia made by one of his serving ministers against another? He mentions the Deputy Prime Minister, who had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister was too weak to do so. And how many formal complaints have now been made? The Minister mentions Adam Tolley. Why is he not allowed to proactively investigate the so-called informal complaints? Will he investigate allegations made by the former Permanent Secretary? And who will finally get to the bottom of the dangerous use of private emails by ministers? Number 10 said, in reference to the Home Secretary, that they could not investigate breaches under previous administrations. But, Mr. Speaker, that's what's happening now with the Deputy Prime Minister, so why not? So why now is there an excuse for refusing to investigate the Home Secretary's breach? Will the Prime Minister appoint a truly independent watchdog?
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and it's wonderful to hear the honourable lady's interest in this matter today. We had, as it happens, a debate on this very issue in Westminster Hall yesterday. And the House will be shocked to hear that...
Minister, I'm here. I'm not over there. And I hate to say there's nobody even standing on that side, so please, come on.
Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Speaker. The House will be shocked to hear that the honourable lady was not present at that Westminster Hall debate. Nor because it was about the ministerial code, about the subject of the urgent question today, and the honourable lady and her honourable friends did not bother to show up. They missed the opportunity to hear the honourable member for Rhondda speak very pertinently on this subject. But not only was the honourable lady there, her colleagues on the front bench did not turn up to ask questions either. Now, the honourable lady refers to rumours in the press. But let us look at the facts. The Prime Minister has been in office for 31 days. On his first day, he said he would make an appointment. He has made repeated assurances in this place and in other places, as have members of the Cabinet. Continuing to the debate yesterday, Prime Minister's questions yesterday, this urgent question today, she talks about the powers of the independent advisor, but I remind her that in May this year, Lord Geit said that we had come up with a workable scheme. And so I have to say that it's starting to sound very much like the opposition can't take yes for an answer. We're going to have an independent advisor, they're going to have the powers that they need, and they are going to be appointed very soon.
SNP spokesperson Stuart Hulsey.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, when the Government published their policy paper on revisions to the Ministerial Code on the 27th of May, it said there would be an enhanced process for the initiation of investigations under the Ministerial Code, that the independent advisor could initiate his or her own investigation, there would be a more specific reference to the advisor in the Ministerial Code, and there would be a duty on ministers to provide all of the information necessary to allow the advisor to discharge his or her duties. However, turns out the Prime Minister is not offering potential candidates any enhanced powers, meaning advisers would not be able to launch their own investigations, and that confirms the blocking of the expansion of powers by his predecessor, So it's a simple question. Why is the government reneging on its own policy statement of May this year, making it more difficult to appoint an independent adviser?
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave a few moments ago. Lord Geit, he seems terribly well informed, but he seems to have stopped short of reading Lord Geit's response to the changes in the terms of reference, where he said this would be a workable scheme.
But then he resigned.
Cavan Jones.
Hear what the Minister says, but could he give any timescale of when the appointment will be made? And in the meantime, can I ask him specifically in terms of the use of private email and WhatsApp groups? What advice has been given to ministers on this, and also, more importantly, also their special advisors?
As I've said, there is a process ongoing to appoint an independent advisor as fast as possible. Prime Minister has been in post for 31 days, and there is standing advice on the use of WhatsApp and private messaging.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, can you confirm whether the fee paid to Adam Turley KC to investigate the claims that you mentioned earlier, can you confirm whether it's greater than the projected annual cost of an ethics advisor?
Minister?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm happy to write to the lady on the to answer.
Christine Chaldy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the Minister's earlier comments, we've waited for 5 months now for an ethics advisor. So the government, every time the government fails to appoint one, it further undermines and corrodes this place's reputation in the public mind. I have tabled a bill giving Parliament, which would give Parliament the power to appoint an ethics advisor if the government fails. So given the government's inability to appoint an ethics advisor, would you now please support that bill and allow us to get on with re-establishing the good reputation of this place?
Minister.
The honourable lady will have heard me point out this Prime Minister, who has said he will appoint an independent advisor, has only been in post for 31 days, that there is a process going on at speed. And in answer to her other question, it is very much the view of this government that it is the Prime Minister who appoints the independent advisor to give advice to the Prime Minister, who answers ultimately to Parliament.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since I became an MP in 2010, we've seen 7 current or former Labour MPs given custodial sentences, 2 Conservatives, 1 Liberal Democrat and 1 Scottish Nationalist. We have countless other cases that come before the House, and this member for Rhondda has spoken eloquently about this previously. We have a by-election tomorrow caused by a Labour MP standing down in disgrace. So I think there is a big issue to solve in standards in our public life, and it goes right across this House. So I've been pleased that my friend the Minister has been able to update the House on the recruitment process underway. Does he agree that backing a stronger code of conduct for members of Parliament is proof that the government is taking code of conduct in this place seriously?
It's very good to hear from my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. This government takes the code of conduct of members extremely seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the absence of the ethics advisor, can the Minister inform the House of the status of the inquiry into Islamophobia that was ordered in January this year?
I know that the next independent advisor will want to take that case extremely seriously.
Ronnie Callan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to point out that the Prime Minister appoints his own ethics advisor. He then determines which investigations can be undertaken, and then he determines what outcomes are taken, what actions are taken, depending on the outcome. Is this maybe why the last 2